Right, today I'm in Oxfordshire with Martin Chapman, or, to those that know and love him, Lofty. Lofty, thanks very much for agreeing to do it.
Pleasure, Si.
I think I've rather unfairly paint you as a bit of a miserable bugger in my blogs for Star Sports, but in reality, you're like happiest on a dog track or a racehorse, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely. I know you try and say, you always say that, miserable Martin, miserable Lofty. Look, I'm never that way, really. I try and smile for the camera. I mean, sometimes if people smile, if I smile, people say I'm breaking wind or something. It's not that bad. Look, I mean, my background's on the race course and the greyhound tracks, and as you say, that's probably where we're almost at home, really. You know, I've been doing it since, you know, I literally could walk with. I mean, going to greyhound tracks. My granddad, God bless him, and gran and uncle used to take me to the greyhound track at Portsmouth when I was about 5 years old and could barely see over the rail. So I've always been going racing, and yeah, that's always been, you know, part of me, really, being at the dogs and being on the horses. I think I went to Brighton when I was about 7 or 8 first time with my mum on the train. Took about an hour and a half to get down there, and you know, I can recall standing on the rails at Brighton and watching the horses go past. So I've always enjoyed the racing and being out on the turf, and I've been lucky enough to say to work there, you know, most of my career, really. You call it, so like I'm sort of like a footballer, but yeah, I've been there most of my life working on the race course and race tracks, and yeah, it's definitely a place I like to be. But again, look, I'm in the office sitting in now doing a bit of training for Star on the greyhounds and what have you, and I'm more than happy here. My bank of computer screen sat behind me, looking like I'm some working in this city, but you know, playing as we go. But yeah, it's all part of the fun. I still enjoy the race course, so, and I'm a happy soul.
Yeah, well, you've been around as long as I can remember. Didn't know you properly, but you've always been Lofty, and that's Lofty. But have you ever had a proper job?
Funny enough, so I had a friend of mine used to say to me, like, well, what do? You stand in the middle of the field and wave your arms about. It's like, you know, I think he did a bit of painting and decorating. So would he say that I've had a proper job? Yeah, I've had a few, I suppose you could call proper jobs. I worked for the post office for a little while, parcel force, and I used to sell paint, and I've sold glazing products, and yeah, a few other bits and pieces, a bit of ducking and diving. But I was always working as well, using evenings and clerking it with dog tracks and doing bits and bobs like that. So to say proper job, it's a bit of a, you know, some of us take our job, you know, seriously. I'm a professional, Simon. You know, every time I go out and do my job, I'm a professional, whether it's a racetrack or sitting down here and working in the home, or you know, working in the office. So it's all yeah. But I suppose a proper job, a 9 to 5 job, I've had 2 or 3, but no, I mean, this has always been what I wanted to do. I mean, say, my granddad and uncle, they had one of the very old betting shops going back before I was born, really. One of the sort of first time betting shops were legalised, and they were involved in that. So I was basically brought up on racing, you know, reading the racing, but Sporting Life it had been then. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, sort of sat on the floor reading it, and I was always brought into racing, and that's how I've been. So, but yeah, I've had a couple of proper jobs, should we say, in inverted commas.
Yeah, those jobs that you mentioned are all the jobs that foremen used to get so that they could still go racing in the afternoon, at least at the local meetings. So I'm assuming you started going racing when you were a kid. So you first started as a, well, saying that, your granddad had a betting shop. So were you a punter, or were you always into the bookmaking side of things?
No, I always enjoyed a bet, even when I was a kid. You know, I used to get my gran to put the bets on the local lad books across the road, and you know, I'm sure like most people of our age, we'd been in there when we were sort of 16 or 17, trying to sneak in under the counter. You know, the advantage of being a big lad, I could always get away looking a little bit older than what I actually was. So even though I was all young, youthful, very good looks and that, you know, so it was a bit of a struggle to convince them I was 18, really. But yeah, you know, so I've always been going in betting shops and punting. Yeah, no, I've always really, that's been my side of it. And obviously I've got into the bookmaking side over it eventually, and always been fascinated by the bookmakers and how they work. And like most people, you know, I'm sure like young Ben, who will probably come on to later on in our little chat, you know, he was very fascinated by the way bookmakers worked and the colour of it. So I always thought to myself, I'd end up in that side of the business somewhere, and luckily that's where I am today.
Do you remember the first day you actually got paid working for a bookie? I assume you was a floor man at your right?
I was, yeah. Funny enough, you mentioned in your book, which you might have plugged once or twice, that your first bet was with Ricky and Son, wasn't it, of Portsmouth? Yeah, at Cheltenham. It was, yeah. He was the first bookmaker I worked for, Ricky. Obviously, my background is coming from Portsmouth. That's where I was born and bred, and to the moved up to Oxfordshire. I lived there for like, you know, the best part of 40 odd years, and yeah, it was at Bath. One day, he was in the silver ring, and he obviously had a lot of trust in me. They stick me out into the main ring, on the floor, on the radios, back and that was in the days, obviously, before you had the exchanges and everybody was the same price, and you could get horses in the silver ring that were like 10 and 12 to 1 in the silver ring. In the main ring, they'd be taking 7 or 8, and we were using that to our advantage. You know, we're backing horses at like, I'm laying horses to fellow bookmakers at 7 and 8 to 1, and they're back in the silver ring at 12s, and I suddenly found I was quite good at that, and I think Ricky was a bit like, you know, you're good, you know, we'll have you more often. And I was on wages at the time, and I thought, why don't I have a share? He offered me a share actually at the start. I thought, why don't I have a share in hindsight? And think I got the pretty sum of £30, which having spoke to Ricky at the time was like him sort of paying somebody a national lottery. You know, it was like being on 25 grand a week getting the 30 quid from Ricky at the time. So went there the following time, had a share, and yeah, it basically went on from there. So we always enjoyed it in the silver rings, but they were good in those days, Si, as well. You know, probably remember yourself what the silver rings were like. We used to go to Bath and Windsor on a Monday night, you know, and it was always pretty decent out in the silvers. They were pretty vibrant. And they were only going back, I'll say, you know, 25, 30 years ago. I'm sounding really old now, but that's only how long ago it was. But yeah, he was the first bookmaker I worked for. My first out of races would have been at Bath.
And that was, I remember, I did the very exact same job, but the alternative was you found it hard to lay the short ones in the silver ring, so you could lay them to the books indoors. And
that's right. I luckily never fell to the thing of backing a horse and of laying it, so I always got it quite right.
Yeah. So, but, you know, we're both of the same sort of era. I mean, you're obviously a fair bit older than me. But who were the faces that made an initial big impression on you? Because I know I used to look around in awe around the better ring. Was there any that really made Lofty sort of do a double take?
Not particularly. I remember in the silver ring there was a bookmaker called Wilf Gilbert from the Midlands. He always bet on like an orange board, and he always seemed to be like ahead of the market. And if he was on a move, you thought half a bit you'd follow him and see what moves he was on. And he was one you always had to keep an eye on out there. I remember one day there was a move for a horse inside at Bath. It might have been Windsor. I remember we backed it with him, and it was like beating, splitting the atom, beating Wilf Gilbert with this bet. And we backed this horse for him to win a fair few quid for our at the time, and I can recall it winning. But I remember him being the big shot outside. Yeah, a few of the dogs as well. Ross Jackson, who we're coming to again later on, a bookmaker at Portsmouth Dogs. I mean, he was a real, before his time and a bit of a character. He was a bit of a playboy, to be fair to him. But there's a few bookmakers like that, I suppose, back in the day as well, in that sort of era. And he was certainly one of those, yeah. And then Ross was certainly a real bookmaker. You thought, yeah, you could be like him one day as well,
So you, what were your sort of haunts early days?
I was a Portsmouth dog man. That was my main place. That was always where I used to go. Started going there when I was about I'll say from a kid first of all, but classic misspent youth. I used to go there, when I was sort of 18, 19, 20. Your Friday night, it'd be the first 3 or 4 hours to be at Portsmouth Dogs, have a few drinks there maybe, and then go out afterwards. So they're going out during the course of the evening. It would just be a night down at Pompey, and I think I learnt a bit more about values. I used to think there's sort of 5 to 4, 6 to 4 chances, and we used to see the without bookmaker was a guy called Stan Bridgman. We had a couple of good dogs actually, he used to put on his board 5 to 4, 6 to 4, 7 to 4, 2. And he used to think sometimes, God, you're backing a dog at 6 to 4 and thinking you're getting value. You wake up in hindsight and think, oh God, look at the percentage you're putting on the board there. But you soon learn, where you're getting the value and where you're not getting the value. But no, that was always my formative years with Portsmouth Dogs.
So how come it took Ricky on the racecourse to give you your first day's work then? Did they not really see the potential in you?
I ended up just clerking there one night, funnily enough. Again, I think we're coming to that later on. There was just the first night someone didn't turn up, and I was literally told to clerk in about 15 minutes, and that was it. And I was away from there. And then I started clerking over the cheap side for a few people. Graduated into the main ring. I think at one stage I worked for every bookmaker down the line there in some stage. Never a regular job until probably a few years later when I sort of started working there regularly. But yeah, I was always a face there, and you just get to know people, don't you? It's like when you go any walk of life, you go somewhere long enough and you get to be known and you get to be a bit of a face. And once seeing me, I know I got a face for radio, really, not for TV, but once you see me, you don't really forget me, do you?
No, I was going to ask how many bookmakers you work for, so obviously loads. So tell us about some of them that would have made a lasting impression.
Oh, quite a few. I mean, there's plenty of layers up and down the line. I say I've worked for in my time. I've worked for a few, quite chunky layers. I mean, I think a few would want to stay more under the radar, but there's a few. I mean, a guy called Jerry from Walton Slaney, who was a real sort of strong layer on the race course, and he'd have a right opinion and used to bet to a card. And we used to go racing, and we'd have some tremendous days at the races. And he used to bet at all the big meetings on the rails. And this is only again, not going back too long, we're probably going back 10 years or so, but it was a real buzz at the ring then, and the amount of money you could take, plenty of people about, plenty of money flying about. Like to Dean Valentine, you've interviewed before, I know, who was always very lively in the ring, and a few times Jerry would be taking him on. I was a bit like, careful here, Jill, sort of like, but Dean would be, Jill, to win a monkey, Jill, to win £2,000, Jill. He'd always be on them. Bad impression, Dean, do apologise, but it always was
quite good.
That wasn't bad, yeah. But no, the likes of that, he was, yeah. So certainly, I enjoyed working for him. We had some great days and some great nights out there. And they say, obviously, I've slowly come through to working for Star, but I've worked for many a bookmaker, large and small. Been lucky enough to be repped a couple of times, and again, Paul Gold, I think you've spoken to before, Pickwick. I was his rep for a while, and used to bet at Newbury and Bath and Chepstow and where else. If you had a varying gaffs, I'll bet for him if we were doubled up. So it was always good to get it, yeah, and they get to be known and at least to be respected and trusted, which is obviously a big thing in this game as well, trust.
Well, that's the only prerequisite for working on course, isn't it? Any particular stories, any disasters? I mean, I've had disasters where I've not got the back
disaster, yeah. One particularly springs to mind one day at Salisbury. It was during the early days of the computer. The computer was being an absolute nightmare all day. We got the clerking book out. Anyway, we're merrily clerking away, obviously, because it was the AGT or NJPC they were called. They were adamant you were writing the names on the back of the ticket and what they were betting and what it was going on anyway. It was a race. Guy come out, always in with a 10-1 shot, and I think a guy had £250 on a 10-1 shot. And there was a confusion whether or not he got a ticket. So we weren't sure. The horse won. Anyway, the guy's come back, and there's a fella standing there, and he's like looking, and I'm like, and I can't find the bet. And I'm like, what you got? I goes, what do you have on it to the guy? And he went £250. So I thought, okay, it must be him. So we give the guy £2,750. Anyway, horror of horrors. Eventually I've looked right to the bottom of the column, and there's £2.50 each way, 33-1 shot that's finished third. And that's the bet he had. Funnily enough, we never found him.
Who were you working for then?
Oh, I can't say, but he'll know.
Did you work for them again after?
I did actually. Yeah, to be fair, the guy was it was a genuine mistake, and I don't think there was more than It was just one of those things that a lot of things contrived, and it was a little bit of a Some people thought it was quite hilarious, but obviously I didn't at the time. I immediately offered to sacrifice myself on the spot, but no, still worked for the guy, and we're still good friends today actually. But yeah, he'll know who it is. So,
so you learnt to clerk in the clerking book before the computers?
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
So who taught you to do that?
So a guy who's no longer with us, a fellow called Ian Kilsby, God bless him, who probably would have been only a year or two younger than me, who died a few years ago at Portsmouth Dog Track. Literally one night there was a character called Slasher, who had a wonderful name, just used to turn up, and he was a typical Pompey dog character, a bit of bluster, and used to knock people. It's just people were like. And there was always like a wall of shame at Pompey dogs. There was like a sort of a metal barrier with like all his names written on it that Slasher had left over the years in permanent marker. Anyway, he turned up one night from painting and decorating with a brown suit covered in paint. And I remember Kilsby saying, "You can't clerk, you can't work for me like that, Tony." His name was Tony. "You can't work for me like that, Tony." And Lofty, "Do you want to clerk?" And I was like, "Well, you have to show me, Kills." And literally within 10 minutes, he'd showed me how to clerk, and I was like, "This is easy, So yeah, there we go. That literally was it. Within 10 minutes, I was the clerk, and I was there for a good few weeks, good few months, and then I sort of moved on from there at Portsmouth Dogs.
It's a bit fast and furious at the dogs clerking, I'd imagine.
It can be, yeah. Portsmouth was getting that way. I've clerked a couple of times at Walthamstow for Ben when Ben was down there eventually, and I can recall clerking one racing post festival night when they literally are coming at it from all angles, and I was a bit like. And a friend of mine was stood there behind me as I'm scribbling bets down furiously. He goes to me, "Can I do the next race?" Like sort of taking the mic a bit. And I was a bit like sweat dripping off me. You literally could just get the bets down, and you had some idea where you were and what you were taking out of dogs. But there's some clerks who I don't profess to be the best clerk in the world by a country mile, but I don't think I'm that bad. But there's clerks head and shoulders above me, and always has been, and always will be. But I think I've got a fairly quick brain anyway, so.